So you're selling your home and you heard you no longer have to pay a buyer's agent, right? Well, technically, yeah, and you never had to. My name is Jan Dykers. I'm a 20-year veteran in the real estate industry in the city of Detroit and Metro Detroit. Let's talk about the real estate settlement that happened this August, what it means for you, the misinformation, the facts, and what is happening in practice and reality. In order to give you all of the information, we need to get in the Wayback Machine to the real estate industry in the 1980s. Prior to that, real estate agents did not represent buyers. There were real estate agents that represented sellers, and usually the buyer would just come to them directly. Or sometimes they would be working with a real estate agent, but that real estate agent didn't represent them, they represented the seller. So there was no actual real estate agent that was representing, advocating for, or protecting the buyer agent. There's essential knowledge that the buyer's agent brings to a transaction, like how to write an offer that works for the buyer and their needs, with all the points of negotiation, understanding how much the home is worth in today's market, and if you're in a competitive environment, how to make your offer stronger to potentially win a multiple offer situation. Also, to support related to inspections, how to address any issues that come up during an inspection, and what your options are to renegotiate after an inspection. Connecting with mortgage companies, insurance companies, home inspectors, and other specialists in the transaction. How to deal with issues related to appraisals and loan approvals, and how to renegotiate should something come up there. Keeping the closing timeline, getting a closing without a hitch, dealing with utility transfers and final water bills, and closing occupancy, and filing documents with the city assessor. Could a buyer do that all without an agent? Sure, but most buyers don't have the time or interest in learning all the knowledge and expertise that somebody like me has picked up over the last 20 years of doing real estate transaction. There's no way that a buyer in one real estate transaction can come to that level of mastery. An unrepresented buyer is usually an uninformed buyer. An uninformed buyer is higher likelihood of not actually coming to the closing table. So sellers, if they think they're saving money by not having to pay two agents because the buyer does not have an agent, if the transaction doesn't go through, the property is going to come back on the market and the listing usually suffers. Usually a listing doesn't sell for as much money when it comes back on the market because it's considered tired and something's wrong with it. Also, there's a higher likelihood with an unrepresented buyer of there being a lawsuit brought by the buyer after the transaction because the buyer didn't think that they were properly represented. As buyer agency became more common in the 80s and 90s, listing agents would offer some of the commission that they negotiated with the seller to the buyer's agent to bring them a buyer and cooperate in the transaction. The MLS, also known as the Multiple Listing Service, is a database of every property for sale or that has been sold. So this is where we go to look up properties that are for sale. This is what Zillow uses to extract its data from. And this is where you can look up properties that have sold so you can determine what a property is worth that is similar to that property. Before the internet, way before I was a real estate agent, the MLS was in books that would get delivered, printed and get delivered to every single real estate office on a weekly basis. So even though the listing agent was sharing their commission with the buyer's agent, technically the commission was coming out of the seller proceeds. Now fast forward to recent history, just after the COVID-19 real estate explosion, the Michigan market increased on average 37% increase of equity for homeowners. Sellers saw the commission that real estate agents were making, and because the good ones always make it look easy, and the bad ones don't even deserve to be paid, sellers were looking at these commissions and going, why am I paying the buyer's agent? Let's make this very clear. In no way has it ever been required for a seller to offer compensation to a buyer's agent. It was just something that happened with great frequency and made a lot of sense. The buyer is the one buying the house, so if you think about it, the buyer is actually paying everyone. The buyer is responsible for the sale. The buyer is paying all of the money and paying the real estate agents and the seller. However, the seller got to decide how to use those funds, and some aggrieved sellers decided that even though it was never required to pay a buyer agent, that they felt forced to do so in the transaction. If they chose not to pay a buyer's agent, that they would be punished by buyer's agents not wanting to show their properties. Just side note, if a buyer wants to see a property, you show it to them. That has always been under our real estate rules and license law. So the seller sued, and there was a massive class action lawsuit, $418 million settlement, and the people who made out the best were the attorneys, as they always do when it comes to class action lawsuits. So here's the outcome of the lawsuit that actually matters to you. I'm going to distill down the 116-page settlement that was signed into a few basic points. First, our listing agreements now make it very clear that there is no obligation for a seller to offer buyer agent compensation. It also says in the listing agreement that commission is not set by law and is fully negotiable. It is always and always has been fully negotiable, but these sellers who sued said that they felt like it was being represented to them that there was a certain percentage of commission that they were supposed to pay because it was standard. Commissions have never been standard. They have always been negotiable. There are certain commissions that you're more likely to see out there, but definitely they have never, ever been required to pay your agent a certain amount. Lastly, if a seller does choose to pay a buyer's agent, it can no longer be advertised in the MLS. Agents can text each other. If you want to know how much an agent is offering buyer agent commission to sell a house, you can text them, you can call them, you can email them, you can create a website where you advertise it, but the only thing you cannot do is put it in the MLS. That's it. Those are the changes. Now, let's talk about how things are working in reality. So the MLS used to be a contract. So if an agent put that they were going to pay a buyer's agent a certain amount of commission to bring them a buyer, that was considered as good as a contract, because when we signed up for our MLS subscriptions, we agreed that it was a contract, that if you put a certain amount of commission on there, you were to abide by that. So now, because it's no longer advertised on the MLS, you have to put it in the contract or in an addendum to the contract. You have to write, seller agrees to pay buyer's agent X dollars of a commission at closing, blah, blah, blah. Now, I have been signing listing agreements with my sellers two different ways. So I have some sellers who want to determine amount of buyer agent commission at the time of signing the listing agreement. They want the status quo. They want nothing to prohibit them from getting the best offer possible for their property, because they want as many buyers and as many agents to be interested in their property as possible. They don't want any deterrent to getting their property sold. And then I have other sellers who want to handle it a little bit differently. What they want to do is they want to say that the commission is negotiable. And so what we'll write in the contract is that no commission is to be paid to the buyer agent. And then also in the contract, we say that they're open to pay buyer agent commission up to a certain amount with the right offer. So then it's sort of up to the buyer agent and the buyer to make the request for compensation at the time of their offer, and the sellers will consider it with the offer. It's sort of a point of negotiation, just like the purchase price, the earnest money amount, the closing date, the financing, post-closing occupancy, and all of the other things you can negotiate in an offer. Now the commission is just one part of that. In reality, I have not done a deal where the seller did not end up paying both agents. It's actually working out just like it did before. We're just having more conversations about commission at the time of the listing agreement, at the time of offer when I'm representing a buyer. And if you think about it, buyers don't necessarily have enough cash to pay their agents. I mean, buyers want to pay the least amount of money possible to buy a house. That's why we have 5% down and 3.5% down and 0% down. So we can make home ownership as accessible as possible to anybody, even somebody that doesn't have a lot of cash savings. And having a buyer have to have enough money to also pay their agent just makes home ownership even less accessible to more people. Buyers want to be able to build the commission into their purchase price. They want to be able to finance it. They want the seller to pay it, and they'll just pay it in the purchase price. If the seller is refusing to pay a buyer agent and the buyer can actually afford to pay their agent out of pocket, then they will probably adjust the purchase price to reflect that. They will probably offer that amount less because they know that they have to pay their agent, and all of the other properties that are on the market are paying agents. So that value of that home is really a value based on paying both agents. And if some buyers can't afford to pay their agent based on the amount of cash that they have, well, then they just can't buy that property. And as a seller, do you really want any impediment to getting your house sold? Since August, I have had one transaction where the seller was offering to pay me less than I had a contract with my buyers for. And so they just paid me the difference. They were paying cash, wasn't a big deal, but they did consider it as part of their offer, and they offered less on the property to make up for the amount that they had to pay me. Every single deal that I've been involved with, the seller has offered compensation or was willing to pay compensation to the buyer's agent at the time of offer. On the seller side, all of my sellers recognize and understand that both agents are a crucial component to getting their home sold quickly, with the least amount of hassle, with certainty, and with the least amount of lawsuits. Thanks so much for watching. I am curious to hear your feedback about this. DM me or put in the comments any questions that you might have.